welcome to Bada Boom. A new age of comics, Ghost Machine #1 is here. Brought to you by the creator-owned company, Ghost Machine, this book provides a first look at some of their upcoming stories, including Redcoat, Rook, Hornsby and Halo, and more. From creators such as Geoff Johns, Peter Tomasi, Ivan Reis, Bryan Hitch, Gary Frank, and more. Listen in as Chris and I discuss our thoughts on this preview. And bada boom.
So it's finally here. Ghost Machine 1 is out now. If you're listening to this, head to your comic book shop and go grab yourself a copy. And if you're the person listening to this after you've done that, hey, we're going to get into Ghost Machine #1, full spoilers. Not that there's much to spoil considering these are introductions of these characters and only a couple pages each. So what did you think, Troy? Did you have any favorite stories or favorite characters? Was it what you expected?
It kind of was. Well, some of it was what I expected. I think most of the stuff in the Unnamed War, we've heard Geoff was gracious enough to come on the podcast and share some stuff about Geiger and Redcoat. So some of those things we've heard of. It was great to see them on the page. But the surprise story that really stood out to me was Hornsby and Halo. That one I was a little taken back, like, oh, I think there's going to be a pretty interesting read to see how these characters develop. It's got a little bit more of it's more of a coming of age story, whereas most of the stuff that's going to be in the Unnamed War, Geiger, Redcoat, the Northerner, it's going to be a lot more action packed from the previews that we've got. There's still some mystery there, and I think that's going to be a lot of fun to explore and discover. But for me, Hornsby and Halo was a surprise book that I'm going to be interested in reading. What about you, Chris? What were your thoughts? What was something that stood out for you?
That's why we have a podcast together. Hornsby and Halo was a surprise for me. I think in terms of the things that were actually teased, the other, Pete Tomasi book with Francis Manapul, Rockefellers, or something I was really interested in. Tomasi's done some great runs on a lot of DC characters. Manapul is my favorite Flash artist of all time. But what was interesting about Hornsby and Halo, you have Tomasi and Peter Snejbjerg collaborating on this, with Rob Lee on letters, and I'd assume Brad Anderson on colors because he's coloring everything. What was interesting about it is you see the cover, you're like, this seems like a kid's book. And then when you read it, and there were some previews of it, but seeing it play out, you kind of see why Ghost Machine works is because you have these high caliber writers, artists, creators coming together to really tell these stories. Because I think this concept in general, you're like, I don't know if I'm really interested in. Then you read it, you're like, oh my God, this is kind of like a New Gods thing where they've, heaven and hell have traded a baby and they're like, hey, you guys got to raise them to the point where they become adults. And we don't know what they're going to become. And that's what's really interesting about that story. So I think that one, because I probably went in the coldest with that. I've been following the creators on Instagram, and I feel like everything else, I've gotten some preview of what it will feel like. It was great to see Geiger again, even though Geiger, in terms of the Ghost Machine universe, we've seen the most of. But it was cool to kind of see, there's some inside joke there, when you see Geiger telling Barney, the wolf, he's like, hey, the dog is going to, tear your throat out. He's like, I mean, wolf. So that's kind of some little I know inside joke between Geoff and Gary. So it was cool to kind of see that. One piece of the Unnamed I was really interested in seeing was the Northerner. We've seen that character appear in Junkyard Joe, in Ground Zeroes. We still don't know what their face looks like, but they look pretty badass. Had an Uzi, and it just seems like they have something cool kind of going on there. But in terms of the best story I read, I have to say Hornsby and Halo was, I think, weirdly enough, the other ones are structured well and stuff like that. But Hornsby and Halo, the way Tomasi and Snejbjerg kind of tell that little preview in this one shot was I got a beginning, middle, and an end. And I'm kind of that cliffhanger put me in a spot where I'm I want more.
Yeah. Same. That's how I felt reading it. I feel like Rook also had that too. And we haven't really heard a lot about Rook leading up to this issue. So the stuff that we did learn about Rook, I was like, oh, this is going to be it's a cool kind of post-apocalyptic world with these new twists with these helmets, and you get a preview image at the end of all these helmets that each helmet lets them communicate with that animal or that species of animal. And there's some helmets I'm like, I can't make out what animal that is. So that one left a little bit of mystery, and I'm interested to see where that one goes and what kind of animals they kind of like incorporate into it as well.
Yeah, and what's super interesting about that world is currently out of the I think four universes in Ghost Machine, Rook stands on its own, and you when you read that story, you see why because that world in particular and that story of Rook Exodus is so vast. There's so much lore packed in those couple pages in terms of you got the Warden War going on. We don't know who Direwolf is, you know. You have the relationship between Rook and Swine. So there's a lot like kind of packed into that. And you could kind of tell like, hey, like there's a lot more going on here than some of the other stories. And you can see why it kind of has to stay on its own a little bit. And then you also you got to tease at what Brad Meltzer's working on, First Ghost. If you get the book, what's really cool about it, it's kind of like a throwback. It has like stat sheets of all the characters with height, power levels, and all that, which is really cool. Yeah, and going back, I have to say, Hornsby and Halo was like, oh my god, this is really good. I can't wait for this to come out. So I don't know if it's in April, but if that's one of the April books, that's definitely one I'm gonna pick up on day one.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there was also an interesting one that I was like, oh, this seems kind of like maybe a like Tales of the Crypt Creaker, the Hyde Street, where like there's like these little weird kind of supernatural things happening to people that are kind of some of them are kind of jerks, some of them are just trying to maybe find a fast way to get ahead in life. And there's like these little mystical things kind of happening to these characters to determine if it's going to work out for them or if it's not going to work out for them. And I think that it seems like a little bit of a Twilight Zone kind of comic book. And so that one also seemed kind of interesting because they don't let you know exactly how the characters that they introduce in this book how their stories end. It's just like a real big cliffhanger of, well, did this guy get hit by a car? Does this person magically lose all this weight or something? So I think that would be a cool reoccurring book to see these little short stories that kind of like the Twilight Zone, but in comic book form.
Yeah, to see Ivan Rice and Jeff Johns on a horror book,
Yeah.
all these years after Aquaman and Blackest Night is cool. And it's cool that you said that because that was the one where it felt like it didn't have like as much of a structure. And now that you say that, bring up that Twilight Zone, it's like, yeah, it's like it definitely had that vibe of like, this is someone going about their life and they're about to make a wrong turn and learn a lesson very hard and fast. So that in itself is also its own universe. So Hyde Street itself, just based on what we read, probably will play out more like that anthology. We'll see.
Yeah.
And then there's some things that are not particularly like teased in here, but we know are coming. So you have The Soulless from Lamont Magee in a Ghost Machine. There's no artist attached to it yet. That's coming out later in this year, and I feel like that's probably going to be in the Hyde Street universe. And then you have Maytal Zchut, who has her series Devour, which is I think the first half of Ghost Machine is all in April, and then the second half is going to be in October, which makes sense because if you think about it, if all these books are monthly as they want them to be, that would be 6 issues in, that'd be 6 months. And that gets us to the second wave of Ghost Machine, which kind of keeps them in a rhythm of like always being on the stands and stuff like that.
Yeah.
We didn't talk too much about it because I think, like I said, it's something we've explored already, but the unnamed stuff was really cool. It was great to see more of Redcoat. It seems like a really fun book and very different. And it seems like Redcoat's book will definitely connect a lot to the Northerner. So we'll see sort of like how he plays into that universe and to see if maybe we get more of him and we see him spin out of it the way Junkyard Joe spun out of Geiger. And if the Northerner if that becomes a book, hopefully it's as good as Junkyard Joe because of all the Ghost Machine stuff so far, Junkyard Joe is definitely my favorite character. my favorite book. So yeah, I liked it. I think it was really cool to be in a position where I was surprised with something like Hornsby and Halo. Like again, I was like, oh, like Rook, like oh, I'm gonna get this is so action packed. Rook is on the cover. You know what I mean? Red coat. Get to see Geiger again. And like to be honest, like I said, Hornsby and Halo was the one book. I was like, I love Pete Tomasi, but I'm like, I don't know if I'm really into this. And then I read it and I'm like, oh my God, this is really good.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. I'm definitely excited for Hornsby and Halo, but I do have to say, like Redcoat, from the moment I saw like that's his powers are he's immortal, and how Geoff talked about, if you could live forever, how long would it take you to change? And I was like, oh, that's a really good concept. And the teaser we got for the first introduction to Redcoat, I'm like, I'm definitely gonna love this book. So I'm excited to pick up Redcoat. I'm excited to pick up Hornsby and Halo. And we didn't talk about it too much, but the Rockefellers also was a pretty good story too. I was a little surprised by that as well. And one of my favorite things throughout these entire books is there these little Easter eggs just here and there. Cause like at the end of the Rockefellers issue, they're watching a drive-in movie theater and it's Junkyard Joe in the movie. And I'm like, oh, these are some nice little Easter eggs. Like, even though if they're separate universes or they're not, it's just cool to kind of see different artists be like, hey, I know you did this one thing in your book. I want to put it real quick in mine. And that's cool. And it's nice to kind of get that whole sense of being connected. And also you just get that excitement of being like, what? That's in a different book. Wait, so this one? And it just feels good.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it also teases the possibility that the Rockefellers conceptually don't just travel through time, but maybe parallel worlds because they're in time zone protection. Is that time protection? It's time zone. So maybe they're going in different parts of time in different worlds. So it definitely, one, I think that one did a good job of like, because that one had the most characters. So it had a lot to do in a short amount of time. And I think, again, Manapul is a master. You could see some of the Flash stuff coming through when it's like the way he sort of like draws like the way things move. Like I felt that
Yeah.
like I was in that van and all that. So that was a really fun book, and I'm excited to see where that goes because conceptually you have like, hey, like this witness protection meets like the Jetsons and all that. So I think what Ghost Machine is doing, they're trying to give us different flavors of things. If everything felt like Geiger or Junkyard Joe, I don't know if people would be as excited. And, walking away from reading this book and sort of being excited about a book like Hornsby and Halo speaks to sort of the level of talent that's associated with it. Because, like I said, if no Ghost Machine attached, if I saw Hornsby and Halo just on the stand, I don't know if I would have picked it up. And now I'm like really excited. Love the art in it, love the pacing, the storytelling, and now I've talked about it a lot in this particular podcast, but like I feel like I'm hyping it up, and that's why I'm saying like if you haven't gotten the book yet, don't listen to us because I think it's best to go in cold when it comes to Hornsby and Halo.
As he says, after we've been talking about it for like the last 15 minutes, he's like, yeah, go in cold.
Listen, that's why that's why I opened up with it. But like I said, the more I talk about it, I'm like, wow, like that, like really like, and I think it speaks to sort of what we like as readers, you know what I mean? Like the things that have really, hit us hard lately. And, in terms of like us seeking out guests and stuff like that, something like, like Local Man, I only read it because I heard a lot of good things about it. I read it and I'm like, oh my God, I probably would have never picked this up on my own. And it surprised me. So it's always good to kind of explore different things. And I think I love the Unnamed universe. And that's very much like in Geoff's and Gary and Bryan Hitch, that's in their wheelhouse. It's not like superhero stuff, but it's almost like superhero adjacent. So they could do that stuff really well. But it's cool to see, like someone like Pete Tomasi, who we know he's good with family stuff because of Batman and Robin, his Superman, Super Son. So we know he's good with that, but to see it sort of taken, without some of the brand names, and still be able to tell a story like this in a short amount of time is really cool. So yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, I am too. And if you haven't yet and you're listening to this podcast, make sure you go to your local comic book store, pick up the first issue of Ghost Machine to get a great introduction to these stories and get ready for everything that they have to offer in all these universes. And with that, bada boom.
Bada boom. Thank you for listening to the Bada Boom podcast. Keep the conversation going on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. Get in the comments on our YouTube channel and let us know what you'd like to hear next. And please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen.